up off the bench.
No. We got complaints. This isn't a hangout spot.
It's a public bench.
I'm a customer, and I'm disabled.
I'm waiting for the bakery truck.
Don't argue with me. Show ID and drop the stick or you're going in cuffs.
That's my cane. Touch it and you're assaulting a disabled veteran on camera. Think before...
Officer Kyle Vance had been patrolling the streets of Sunnyvale for a little over 4 years, long enough to develop a swagger, but not long enough to cultivate wisdom. He was 29 years old, fit, aggressive, and operated under the dangerous delusion that his badge granted him immunity from consequences. He was the type of officer who referred to citizens as civilians, with a sneer, believing that authority was something you took, not something you earned. On a bright Tuesday morning in October, Vance made a decision that would not only end his career in disgrace, but would force the city to write a check for $1.6 million. He walked into a situation armed with arrogance and bias, completely unaware that the man he was about to humiliate had given more to his country than Vance could ever comprehend. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe that respect is a two-way street, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories because the truth matters, and accountability is the only way forward. The Sunnyvale Farmers Market is a local institution. Located in the heart of the historic district, it's an open-air gathering place that operates every Tuesday and Saturday. It's the kind of place where neighbors catch up, where the smell of fresh kettle corn hangs in the air, and where the community feels safe. The market is lined with white tents selling organic produce, artisanal jams, and fresh-baked goods. It was 10:15 a.m. The sun was high and warm, and the aisles were bustling with retirees, stay-at-home parents, and professionals taking a late morning break. It was a picture-perfect American morning until the dispatch radio crackled in Vance's patrol car. He was parked 2 blocks away, scrolling through his phone, bored and looking for something to do. The call came in as a suspicious individual refusing to leave the market area. The caller, a vendor named Brenda, sounded frantic, claiming she felt threatened by a man loitering near her booth. Vance didn't ask for details. He didn't ask if a crime had been committed. He heard suspicious and refusing to leave, and his mind immediately painted a picture. He put the car in gear and sped toward the market, already deciding how he was going to handle the situation. He didn't plan to investigate. He planned to dominate. In his 4 years on the force, Vance had racked up 6 complaints for discourtesy and 2 for excessive use of force. Both force complaints were dismissed by Internal Affairs as within policy, reinforcing his belief that he was untouchable. He parked his cruiser illegally in a loading zone right at the market's entrance, the lights flashing unnecessarily against the bright morning sun. He stepped out, adjusting his duty belt, his sunglasses hiding eyes that were scanning for a target. He wasn't looking for a problem to solve. He was looking for a person to break. He marched past the market manager, who tried to flag him down to explain the situation, and headed straight for the location Brenda had described. He saw the subject sitting on a bench, and in Vance's mind the narrative was confirmed. He saw a threat. The city of Sunnyvale was about to pay dearly for his lack of judgment. Major Elias Thorne, U.S. Army retired, was not a man who looked for trouble. At 58 years old, he had seen enough conflict to last 10 lifetimes. He had served his country for 28 years, starting as an enlisted infantryman and rising through the ranks to retire as a field-grade officer. He had led men in Panama, the Balkans, and finally Afghanistan. It was in the Kandahar province 7 years ago that his career in the field ended. An improvised explosive device. IED had detonated under his convoy vehicle. The blast had taken the hearing in his left ear and shattered his right leg. Surgeons had saved the leg barely, but the damage was permanent. Elias walked with a heavy limp and required the use of a sturdy hand-carved oak cane to get around. The cane wasn't a prop. It was a necessity, a constant reminder of the price he had paid for the flag he loved. Despite the pain that flared up on humid days, Elias carried himself with an upright, rigid posture that screamed military discipline. He kept his hair high and tight, his face clean-shaven, and his clothes immaculate. That Tuesday, Elias was dressed in a crisp navy blue polo shirt, khaki slacks pressed with a military crease, and polished leather loafers. He wasn't homeless. He wasn't a vagrant. He was a homeowner who lived 3 miles away in a subdivision he had chosen for its quiet streets. He had come to the market for 2 things: heirloom tomatoes for a salad and a loaf of sourdough bread from the bakery stand that only arrived after 10 a.m. He had purchased his tomatoes and placed them in a canvas tote bag. The bakery truck was late, so Elias had done what any reasonable person with a shattered leg would do. He found a bench and sat down. The bench was public property situated near a stall selling artisanal jams. Elias checked his watch, a heavy tactical timepiece he'd worn for 2 decades, and rested his hands on the head of his oak cane. He closed his eyes for a moment, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face, listening to the hum of the market. To anyone paying attention, Elias Thorne looked exactly like what he was: a dignified, aging warrior enjoying a quiet morning. He was a man of immense patience and integrity. He was a deacon at his church and a volunteer at the local VA hospital, helping young soldiers navigate the bureaucracy of benefits. He believed in order in law and in the fundamental goodness of his community. He had no idea that simply sitting on a bench while black would be enough to strip him of that dignity in the eyes of the law. He sat there, a Purple Heart recipient, a Bronze Star holder, waiting for bread, while a storm named Officer Vance was barreling toward him. Brenda Miller was 38 years old and had been selling her homemade jams at the Sunnyvale Farmers Market for 3 seasons. She considered herself the self-appointed guardian of the market's atmosphere. She was the type of person who monitored the parking lot for cars that didn't look like they belonged and kept the non-emergency police line on speed dial. Her stall, Brenda's Berry Best, was located right next to the public bench where Major Thorne was sitting. Brenda had been watching Elias for 10 minutes. In her mind, his presence was a disruption. He hadn't bought anything from her. He was just sitting there. To Brenda, a large black man sitting still was not a customer. He was a potential problem. She saw him check his watch and interpreted it as him timing the security patrols. She saw him close his eyes and interpreted it as him being under the influence of something. She saw the canvas tote bag at his feet and wondered if he was using it to steal merchandise. Her bias was a quiet, corrosive thing. She didn't use slurs. She used words like uncomfortable, safety, and loitering. She convinced herself that her unease was based on intuition rather than prejudice. He's driving away customers. She muttered to herself, though the market was bustling and no one else seemed to notice the man on the bench. In fact, a young couple had just walked past him, and Elias had politely pulled his legs in to let them pass. Brenda didn't see the courtesy. She only saw the intrusion. After 15 minutes, Brenda decided she had endured enough. She didn't speak to Elias. She didn't ask if he needed help or if he was waiting for someone. She stepped behind her display of strawberry preserves, pulled out her cell phone, and dialed 911. 911. What is your emergency? I'm at the farmer's market on Main, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a whisper, creating a drama that didn't exist. There's a man here who is refusing to leave. He's been loitering right in front of my stand for 20 minutes. He's making me and my customers very uncomfortable. Is he aggressive, ma'am? Has he threatened anyone? The dispatcher asked. He's glaring at people. Brenda lied, watching Elias looking at the bakery stand down the row. And he has a large stick or club with him. I'm worried he might use it. He just doesn't look like he belongs here. Please send someone before something happens. We have an officer in the area, the dispatcher said. Brenda hung up, feeling a surge of self-righteous satisfaction. She believed she was protecting the community. She believed she was doing the right thing. She looked at Elias, who was now checking his phone, unaware that his mere existence in that space had just been criminalized. Brenda turned back to a customer, a smile plastering her face, completely disconnected from the devastation she had just set in motion. She wanted him gone. She had no idea that her call would expose the ugly underbelly of the town's policing and cost the taxpayers millions. Officer Vance didn't walk through the crowd. He cut through it. His presence was kinetic and aggressive. People stepped out of his way, conversations stopping as he passed. He wasn't scanning the crowd for safety. He was locked onto the coordinates Brenda had given. He saw the bench. He saw the black man. He saw the club. Elias Thorne was responding to a text message from his wife asking if he wanted to pick up dinner on the way home when a shadow fell over him. He looked up expecting perhaps a neighbor or the baker. Instead, he found Officer Kyle Vance towering over him, hand resting casually but menacingly near his holstered firearm. "You need to move along, partner," Vance said. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the casual disrespect Vance reserved for people he deemed lesser. Elias blinked his mind, processing the tone. He didn't stand up immediately. His leg was stiff and sudden movements were painful. He slowly lowered his phone to his lap and met the officer's gaze with the steady, steel-eyed look of a man who had stared down warlords. "Excuse me, officer," Elias said, his voice deep and calm, the voice of a man accustomed to giving orders, not receiving them from children in uniform. "I said, time to go," Vance snapped, stepping closer, invading Elias's personal space. "We got complaints. You're loitering. This is a market for paying customers, not a homeless shelter." The insult hung in the air. Elias felt a flash of anger, but he tamped it down instantly. Discipline. Always discipline. "I am a paying customer, officer," Elias said, gesturing to the tote bag at his feet. "I've purchased produce, and I am waiting for the bakery stand to open. I am sitting on a public bench." "I don't see any receipt," Vance said, looking at the bag with disdain. "And the manager wants you gone. So you can walk away, or I can help you walk away." Elias looked past Vance and saw Brenda watching from her stall, her arms crossed, a look of vindication on her face. He understood immediately. "I have done nothing wrong," Elias said, shifting his weight. "I have a right to be here. I am a citizen of this town, and I am resting my leg. If there is a specific crime I am suspected of, I'd like to know what it is." Vance bristled. He hated jailhouse lawyers. He hated when people knew their rights. He expected fear, and when he got confidence instead, he interpreted it as resistance. "You want to get smart?" Vance's voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. "I'm giving you a lawful order. Disperse." "A lawful order must be based on a law." Elias corrected him gently but firmly. "Sitting on a public bench in a public park during operating hours is not a crime. I am not blocking the path. I am not disturbing the peace. I am simply existing." Vance's face flushed red. He was losing control of the interaction, and his ego couldn't handle the public defiance. He decided right then that he didn't care about the law. He cared about winning. "Let me see your ID," Vance demanded, extending his hand. Elias sat perfectly still. He knew the law better than Vance did. He knew that in this state this was a Terry stop situation. An officer needed reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime to demand identification. Being black on a bench didn't qualify. "Officer," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. "I am not required to identify myself unless I am being detained for a crime. Am I being detained?" "You're being detained for trespassing." Vance lied. It was a weak pretext. It was a public park. "You cannot trespass in a public park unless you have been formally trespassed by the authority having jurisdiction," Elias said. "Has the Parks Department asked me to leave?" Vance had had enough. He stepped back and keyed his radio, though he didn't speak into it. It was a theater of intimidation. "Stand up," Vance barked. "Now, hands where I can see them." Elias sighed. He knew where this was going. He knew that any sudden move would be interpreted as a threat. "I am going to stand up." Elias announced clearly for the benefit of the people who were now stopping to watch. "I have a disability. I need to use my cane to stand. I am reaching for my cane." Elias moved his right hand slowly toward the oak cane resting against the bench. "Drop the weapon," Vance shouted, jumping back and drawing his taser. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. "It is a cane, officer," Elias said, freezing his hand. "I am a disabled veteran. I cannot stand without it." "I said don't touch it," Vance yelled. He was adrenaline dumping now, his training failing him completely. He saw a large man reaching for a heavy object. He didn't hear veteran. He didn't hear disability. He only heard his own panic. "Get on the ground. Do it now." "I physically cannot get on the ground easily," Elias said, his voice straining to remain calm. "If you force me down, you will injure me. I am a retired field-grade officer of the United States Army. You are making a mistake, son. Take a breath." Calling him son was the final straw for Officer Vance. He holstered the taser and lunged forward. He wasn't going to wait for compliance. He was going to enforce it. "I told you what to do," Vance grunted. Elias didn't fight back. He had the training to dismantle the young officer in seconds, but he knew that if he raised a hand, he would be shot. He chose survival. He chose to let the injustice happen so he could fight it later in a courtroom. Vance kicked the oak cane away. It clattered loudly across the pavement, spinning out of reach. Without his support, Elias's injured leg buckled. He instinctively reached out to the bench to catch himself, but Vance was already on him. The officer grabbed Elias by the shoulder and the back of his polo shirt, using his momentum to hurl the older man toward the ground. Elias hit the concrete hard. His glasses flew off. A sharp, blinding pain shot up his right leg as the metal pins and reconstructed bone jarred against the pavement. He groaned a deep, guttural sound of agony. "Stop resisting," Vance screamed, dropping his knee onto the small of Elias's back, driving the air from his lungs. "I am not resisting." Elias wheezed, his cheek pressed against the dirty asphalt. "I am in pain. My leg." "Hands behind your back." Vance grabbed Elias's left wrist and wrenched it up toward his shoulder blades with unnecessary force. By now, a crowd of 20 or 30 people had formed a circle. Phones were out. The cameras were rolling. "He didn't do anything," a man in a baseball cap shouted from the crowd. "He was just sitting there." "That's a cane, you idiot, not a weapon," another woman yelled. Vance ignored them. He was in the tunnel now. He grabbed Elias's other hand and slapped the handcuffs on, ratcheting them tight. Too tight. The metal bit into the skin of Elias's wrists. "Officer," Elias said, his voice tight with pain but surprisingly steady. "You are arresting Major Elias Thorne, U.S. Army, retired. I have a reconstructed right leg and shrapnel in my lower back. You are currently injuring a disabled veteran. I want this documented." "Shut up," Vance panted, pulling Elias up. Because Elias couldn't use his leg, he was dead weight. Vance had to drag him, making it look like Elias was refusing to walk. "He can't walk. Look at his leg." The crowd was getting hostile now. "Get his cane." Vance didn't get the cane. He left it lying on the ground. He dragged Elias across the pavement to the patrol car, opened the back door, and shoved the decorated officer inside like a sack of garbage. Elias had to contort his stiff leg to fit, grimacing in silence. As Vance slammed the door, he looked back at the crowd. He saw the phones. He saw the anger. For a split second, doubt crept in. But he pushed it down. He was the law. The law was always right. He walked back, picked up the cane, and threw it in the trunk. Then he got in the driver's seat and peeled away, leaving the market in stunned silence. The drive to the precinct was short and silent. Elias sat in the back, eyes closed, regulating his breathing to manage the pain radiating from his leg. He was memorizing everything. The time, the speed, the officer's badge number 492, the lack of seatbelt, the aggressive braking. He was building his case file in his head. When they arrived at the station, Vance pulled Elias out of the car. Elias stumbled, his leg useless without the cane. Vance had to practically carry him to the booking desk. Sergeant Miller was the watch commander that day. He was 55 years old, a career cop who believed in community policing and common sense, two things that were absent from this arrest. He looked up from his paperwork and saw Vance dragging a well-dressed, gray-haired black man into the holding area. Miller noticed the quality of the man's clothes. He noticed the military haircut. He noticed the way the man held his head up despite being manhandled. "Vance, what do we have here?" Miller asked, coming around the desk. "Trespassing, resisting failure to ID." Vance recited the script. "Suspect refused to leave the farmer's market. Got aggressive. Had a weapon." "A weapon?" Miller looked at Elias. "You searched him. He had a club. It's in the trunk." "It is a cane sergeant." Elias spoke up. His voice filled the room. "I am Major Elias Thorne. I am a Purple Heart recipient. That officer kicked my medical device away and assaulted me." Miller froze. He looked at Vance, then back at Elias. "Uncuff him, now. Sarge, he was—" "I said uncuff him," Miller roared. Vance fumbled with the keys and removed the cuffs. Elias rubbed his wrists, which were bleeding slightly. "Major," Miller said, his tone shifting to respectful urgency. "Do you have identification?" "In my back pocket," Elias said. "Wallet." Miller gestured for permission, then gently removed the leather wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the blue retiree's ID card. Major Elias Thorne, USA, retired. Behind it was a card identifying him as a Purple Heart recipient, granting him priority access to VA services. Miller looked at the ID. Then he looked at Vance. The look was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You arrested a field-grade officer for a cane." Miller whispered the silence in the room heavy. "He refused to ID," Vance stammered. "He was acting suspicious. He's a 58-year-old disabled veteran buying vegetables." Miller slammed the wallet down on the counter. "Did you verify the complaint? Did you ask for a supervisor?" Vance had no answer. Miller turned to Elias. "Major, I need to get you a chair. Do you need a medic?" "My leg is likely re-injured," Elias said calmly. "I need my cane. And I want to file a formal criminal complaint against this officer for assault and battery." "Get his cane, Vance," Miller ordered. "And then give me your badge and gun. You're done for the day. You might be done forever." Vance walked out to the car, his legs feeling heavy. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a cold pit of dread. He realized finally that he wasn't the predator. He was the prey, and he had just walked into a trap of his own making. The fallout was swift and catastrophic for the city of Sunnyvale. The video footage from the bystanders hit the internet before Elias was even released from the hospital, where he was treated for a hairline fracture in his previously reconstructed tibia. The image of a 29-year-old officer kicking a cane away from a 58-year-old black veteran went viral globally. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The dignity of the major versus the thuggishness of the officer. The headlines wrote themselves. "Hero handcuffed. Purple Heart profiling." The city attorney took one look at the police body cam footage, which confirmed everything Elias and the witnesses said, and told the mayor to settle immediately. There was no defense. Vance had violated Fourth Amendment rights Americans with Disabilities Act protections and department policy. If this went to a federal jury, they wouldn't just award millions. They would dismantle the department. The settlement was agreed upon in 3 weeks, $1.6 million, to Major Elias Thorne. Officer Kyle Vance was fired 6 days after the incident. The chief of police didn't just fire him. He submitted his name to the state decertification board, ensuring Vance would never wear a badge in any state again. Vance tried to fight it through the union, but even the union wouldn't touch this. He was left unemployed, disgraced, and facing a potential civil rights lawsuit of his own. Brenda Miller, the vendor who made the call, faced her own reckoning. The release of the 911 tape revealed her lies. The community boycotted her stand. The Farmers Market Board permanently revoked her vendor license for violating their code of conduct regarding harassment. She lost her business because she couldn't stand the sight of a black man sitting on a bench. But money and firings don't fix the leg. Major Thorne spent 6 months in physical therapy to regain the mobility he lost that day. He never went back to that farmer's market. We often talk about supporting the troops in this country. We put bumper stickers on our cars and wave flags on holidays. But true respect isn't a slogan. It's how we treat people when they aren't in uniform. It's acknowledging that a man's dignity shouldn't depend on his ability to produce an ID card on command. Major Thorne fought for freedom abroad only to have it stolen from him at home by a man who swore to protect him. Systemic bias doesn't always look like a burning cross. Sometimes it looks like a nervous vendor and an arrogant cop on a sunny Tuesday morning. It looks like the assumption that a black man resting is a black man loitering. What do you think? Should officers be personally liable for settlements when they violate civil rights, or should the taxpayers foot the bill? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and please share this story. We have to keep shining a light on these injustices until the shadow of bias is gone for good.
Step away from the Mercedes, now. Drop the keys and show me proof of status.
This is my car. You have no reasonable suspicion. Identify yourself properly right now.
You're loitering in a high-value lot and refusing a lawful order. Turn around or you're going in cuffs.
Touch me and you'll be arresting a DOJ
This isn't a
senior
stop, it's a
advisor
law.
Agent Derek Thorne had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE, specifically within enforcement and removal operations for 9 years, when he made the decision that would implode his life and cost the federal government a record-breaking $6.5 million settlement. At 34 years old, Thorne was a man who walked with the heavy, confident stride of someone who believed his authority was absolute. He had built a reputation in the Northern Virginia field office as a producer, an agent who brought in numbers who didn't get bogged down in the gray areas of bureaucracy, and who prided himself on what he called his gut instinct. But that instinct was about to lead him into a catastrophic collision with a force he wasn't capable of comprehending. Before we dive into the details of this Sunday morning disaster, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that no citizen should be targeted based on their appearance, hit that subscribe button. We bring these stories to light because accountability only happens when the public is watching. It was a crisp Sunday morning in late October in Arlington, Virginia. The leaves were turning deep shades of amber and crimson, framing the historic St. Jude's Episcopal Church in a picture of suburban tranquility. This area, just across the Potomac from Washington, D.C., is the seat of power for the nation's capital. It is a neighborhood of diplomats, senators, lobbyists, and high-ranking career officials who value privacy and decorum above all else. The church parking lot was filled with luxury sedans and SUVs, the quiet humming of engines the only sound as the 11 a.m. service concluded. Dr. Elena Vance had been a member of St. Jude's for over 20 years. At 56 years old, she was a pillar of the community, a woman whose presence commanded respect not through volume, but through a quiet, unshakable dignity. Dr. Vance was currently serving as a senior advisor on civil rights for the Department of Justice, a role she had ascended to after 3 decades of service as a federal prosecutor and a constitutional law scholar. She was the woman the Attorney General called when complex interpretations of liberty and security were on the line. She had drafted policy for 3 different administrations. Her colleagues knew her as a brilliant legal mind with a steel-trap memory and a low tolerance for incompetence. On this particular Sunday, Dr. Vance was not thinking about federal statutes or civil rights litigation. She was thinking about the sermon she had just heard and the brunch she was planning to attend with her husband, who was away on business but due back that evening. She walked toward her vehicle, a pristine silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. She wore a tailored navy blue dress suit, a string of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, and carried a leather briefcase that contained unclassified but sensitive briefs she planned to review later. She looked like exactly what she was, a successful, sophisticated woman of stature. But Derek Thorne, sitting in his unmarked government SUV 3 streets over, was not looking for stature. He was looking for a target. He was technically off the clock, but Thorne was the type of agent who never truly turned off. He was logged into the dispatch frequencies, scanning for opportunities. He had been reprimanded twice in the last 3 years for aggressive stops that bordered on harassment, but his union representative had managed to get the disciplinary actions reduced to verbal counseling. His supervisors noted in his file that Thorne had difficulty separating lawful behavior from his personal biases, a polite way of saying he saw crimes where there were none, particularly when the subjects were people of color. Thorne was 34, young enough to still have ambition, but old enough to have grown cynical. He believed the system was too soft. He believed that people who didn't belong in certain neighborhoods were usually up to something. So when a call came over the local police frequency, a low-priority report of a suspicious individual loitering in the church lot, Thorne didn't wait for the local police to handle it. He heard the description, and his gut told him this was his jurisdiction. He turned the ignition, threw the SUV into gear, and sped toward St. Jude's, convinced he was about to make a bust that would remind his superiors just how valuable he was. To understand why Agent Thorne was speeding toward a church parking lot on a Sunday, we have to look at the source of the call. Martha Reynolds, a 52-year-old resident who lived in the manicured townhomes adjacent to the church, was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's character. Martha was the type of person who kept a log of license plates she didn't recognize. She monitored the comings and goings of delivery trucks with the intensity of a border guard. And on this morning, from her second-story window, she saw Dr. Elena Vance standing by the silver Mercedes. Vance had paused at her car door to check a text message on her phone. She stood there for perhaps 2 minutes, enjoying the autumn sun on her face. To Martha Reynolds, this was not a woman checking a text. This was a suspicious character casing a vehicle. In Martha's worldview, a black woman standing alone next to a $100,000 car in this specific zip code didn't compute as ownership. It computed as theft, or worse. Martha didn't see a DOJ advisor. She saw a threat to her property values. She picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency line, her voice trembling with manufactured anxiety. "Yes, I need to report a suspicious person at St. Jude's Church," Martha told the dispatcher. "There's a woman African-American loitering by the luxury cars. She's been there for a long time. She's looking into windows. I think she might be trying to break in, or maybe she's waiting for a drug deal. It looks like... well, she doesn't look like she lives here." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. Is she holding a weapon? Is she acting aggressively? "No," Martha admitted, "but she's just standing there, menacingly. And she's definitely not a member. I know everyone at that church." This was a lie. The church had over 500 members, and Dr. Vance had attended longer than Martha had lived in the neighborhood. But the seed was planted. The call went out as a suspicious person/potential auto theft in progress. Agent Thorne heard the dispatch, and his mind immediately filled in the blanks. Auto theft ring, undocumented criminals, drug money. In his 9 years at ICE, Thorne had developed a tunnel vision that filtered the world through the lens of immigration enforcement. He assumed that any crime involving a person of color in an affluent area was likely tied to a network he could dismantle. He didn't care that auto theft was a local police matter. He wanted the glory. He wanted the collar. He arrived at the church lot at 11:14 a.m., pulling his SUV in at a sharp angle to block the exit lane, effectively trapping anyone trying to leave the row where Dr. Vance was parked. He spotted her immediately. She was just opening the door to the Mercedes. In Thorne's mind, he had caught her in the act. He didn't see the tailored suit or the pearls. He saw a suspect entering a high-value vehicle. Thorne slammed his door shut and marched toward her, his hand resting instinctively near the holster on his hip. He didn't have his tactical vest on, just a windbreaker with "Police Ice" emblazoned on the back in small letters, and his badge hanging from a chain around his neck. He didn't announce himself. He didn't observe. He simply attacked. "Hey, you step away from the vehicle," Thorne bellowed, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the church. Dr. Vance froze. She looked up, startled, phone in one hand, car keys in the other. She saw a white man in jeans and a windbreaker storming toward her with aggression radiating from him like heat. She didn't immediately recognize him as law enforcement. She saw a threat. "Excuse me," Dr. Vance said, her voice calm but firm. "Can I help you?" "I said step away from the car, drop the keys. Now." Thorne was within 10 feet of her, closing the distance rapidly. "I am not dropping my keys," Vance replied, her demeanor shifting from startled to authoritative. "This is my vehicle. Who are you?" "Federal agent. And I'm asking the questions. Whose car is this? How did you get the keys?" Thorne stopped 3 feet from her, invading her personal space, using his physical size to intimidate. Dr. Vance took a half step back, not out of fear, but to maintain a defensive tactical distance, a habit from her years working alongside federal marshals. "I am Dr. Elena Vance. This is my vehicle. I have just finished attending services. If you are a federal agent, you are behaving in a highly irregular manner. Identify yourself properly." Thorne sneered. "I don't need to show you anything until you prove you belong here. We've had reports of theft rings in this area. You fit the description. Let's see some ID, proof of citizenship. Now." The demand for proof of citizenship hung in the crisp autumn air, a blatant, ugly reveal of exactly where Agent Thorne's mind was. He wasn't investigating a car theft anymore. He was profiling. He looked at a 56-year-old black woman in a bespoke suit and decided she must be a foreign national involved in criminal enterprise. Dr. Vance stared at him, her expression hardening into the look that had withered defense attorneys for decades. "Officer," she began, deliberately refusing to use his preferred title. "You are demanding proof of citizenship from a U.S. citizen standing in a church parking lot. On what reasonable suspicion? Do you have probable cause to believe an immigration violation has occurred?" Thorne bristled. He wasn't used to suspects knowing the vocabulary. He wasn't used to them looking him in the eye. "I have a witness report of suspicious activity. You're loitering. You're in possession of a high-value vehicle that I doubt you can explain. And now you're being combative. That gives me all the suspicion I need. ID. Now. Or you're going in cuffs." "I am not being combative. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights," Vance said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly quiet. "I am a Department of Justice senior advisor. I have worked for the federal government for 30 years. If you touch me, if you continue this harassment, you will be violating federal law." Thorne laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Department of Justice, right? And I'm the director of the CIA. You think I haven't heard that one before? You people always have a story. I know the law. I work for the government. It's always a cover." "You people," Vance repeated. "Careful, Agent. You are digging a hole you will not be able to climb out of." "I'm done talking," Thorne snapped. "You're refusing to identify yourself. You're refusing a lawful order. Turn around." "I will identify myself," Vance said, reaching slowly toward her purse, which was resting on the hood of the car. "I am going to retrieve my credentials. Do not mistake this for a weapon." "Slowly," Thorne yelled, his hand tightening on his hip. Vance opened her purse with deliberate, steady movements. She bypassed her driver's license and went straight for the leather bifold wallet that held her DOJ commission. It was distinct, heavy, with a gold-embossed seal and a holographic federal ID card that granted her access to the highest levels of government buildings, including the White House. She flipped it open and held it up eye level with Thorne. Department of Justice, Senior Advisor Elena Vance, badge number 004-9, 2-Alpha. Read it. Agent. Thorne looked at the badge. He saw the seal. He saw the photo. But his brain, poisoned by years of unchecked bias and an adrenaline loop he couldn't break, refused to process the information. He had already decided she was a criminal. Therefore, the badge could not be real. "Nice prop," Thorne said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Where did you get it? The same guy who sold you the fake papers for the car. That's a high-quality forgery, I'll give you that. But it's federal property fraud. That's a felony." Dr. Vance lowered the badge, her eyes widening in genuine disbelief. "You cannot be serious. You are looking at a legitimate federal credential and calling it a fake officer. Call your supervisor. Call the DOJ switchboard. Verify this right now." "I don't need to call anyone to know a scam when I see one." Thorne stepped forward, grabbing Dr. Vance's wrist. "You're under arrest for impersonating a federal officer, resisting arrest, and suspected auto theft." The physical contact was the crossing of the Rubicon. Dr. Vance did not pull away. She knew that any physical resistance would be used to justify violence. She went rigid. "You are making a mistake that will end your career," she stated, her voice projecting so that the people now exiting the church could hear. "I am a federal official. You are assaulting me." The scene in the parking lot had shifted from a quiet misunderstanding to a public spectacle. The 11 o'clock a.m. service had fully let out, and dozens of parishioners, lawyers, doctors, civil servants were streaming toward their cars. They saw a man in a windbreaker twisting the arm of one of their most respected community members. "Hey, what are you doing?" a male voice called out. It was Franklin Miller, a retired judge who had known Elena Vance for 15 years. "That is Elena Vance. Let go of her." Thorne whipped his head around his face, red with exertion and anger. "Back off, federal agent. This is an active arrest." "She is a DOJ advisor," Miller shouted, stepping closer but keeping his hands visible. "I know her. You are making a massive error. Son, she's a fraud," Thorne yelled back, spinning Vance around to force her against the side of her Mercedes. "She presented false credentials. Back away, or you'll be charged with obstruction." Dr. Vance's face was pressed against the cold metal of her car. She felt the humiliating twist of her arm behind her back. The pain was sharp, aggravating an old shoulder injury, but she refused to cry out. She focused her mind. She needed to survive the next 10 minutes. "I am complying," Vance said loudly, clearly for the witnesses. "I am offering no resistance. This officer is using excessive force on a compliant subject. My name is Elena Vance. I am a DOJ advisor. Please record this." Phones were already out. 3 teenagers standing near the church steps were streaming live. Judge Miller was recording. A woman in the front row was on the phone with 911. 911, what is your emergency? "There is a rogue officer attacking a woman at St. Jude's Church. He claims to be federal. He is hurting her. We need police now." Thorne ignored the crowd. He was locked in. He pulled his handcuffs from his belt. He didn't use the standard technique. He was rough, ratcheting the metal cuffs down hard on Dr. Vance's wrists, pinching the skin. "Stop moving," he barked, though she hadn't moved an inch. "The cuffs are too tight," Vance said calmly. "You are cutting off circulation. That is a policy violation." "Stop resisting and they won't hurt," Thorne retorted. He patted her down his hands, moving clumsily over her tailored suit. He grabbed the DOJ credentials from her hand and shoved them into his own pocket. "Evidence," he muttered. He grabbed her by the upper arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "Let's go." "My car," Vance said. "You cannot leave my vehicle unsecured." "It'll be impounded as evidence of the theft ring," Thorne said. "Move." He marched her across the parking lot toward his SUV. The crowd parted, a sea of shocked faces. People were shouting, "Shame on you," and let her go. Thorne felt like a hero surrounded by a hostile mob. He convinced himself that these people were duped, that he was the only one who saw the truth. He was the thin blue line protecting them from their own naivety. He shoved Dr. Vance into the back seat of the government SUV. The cage was cramped. The seat was hard plastic. He slammed the door, silencing the shouts of the crowd. Dr. Vance sat up straight despite her hands being bound behind her. She took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a second, visualizing the statutes she would use to dismantle this man's life. When she opened them, her eyes were dry and cold. Thorne climbed into the driver's seat, breathing heavy. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch, this is Agent Thorne. I have one female subject in custody. 18 U.S.C. 912, impersonating an officer. Also suspect 18 U.S.C. 2312, stolen vehicles. Transporting to field office now. Copy, Agent Thorne. Status of subject. Combative but secured." Thorne lied. Dr. Vance heard the lie. She memorized the time. 11:28 a.m. The drive to the Fairfax ICE field office took 30 minutes. It was a silent, suffocating journey. Thorne didn't speak. He turned on the radio to a talk station, turning the volume up as if to drown out the reality of what he had just done. He was running on adrenaline, rehearsing his report in his head. Subject was evasive. Presented high-quality forged documents. Attempted to flee. He was editing the truth in real time to fit his actions. In the back seat, Dr. Elena Vance sat in silence. She was in pain. The handcuffs were cutting into her radial nerve, causing her thumbs to go numb. But she did not ask him to loosen them again. She wanted the marks. She wanted the bruising. Every minute those cuffs remained on was another zero on the settlement check, another nail in the coffin of his career. She mentally catalogued the procedural errors. Failure to articulate reasonable suspicion. Failure to verify federal credentials. Excessive force on a compliant subject. Denial of due process. Racial profiling. She looked at the back of Thorne's head. She saw a man who was dangerous not because he was evil, but because he was mediocre and empowered. He was a man who had been told his instincts were law. "Agent," Vance said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. "Shut up back there," Thorne snapped, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I want to make sure you understand the gravity of your situation," she continued. "You are transporting a DOJ senior advisor in handcuffs. When we arrive, you are going to be met by your special agent in charge. Do you know Director Holloway?" Thorne hesitated. He did know Director Holloway. The man was a legend in the agency, a strict disciplinarian who ran the field office with military precision. "I know him," Thorne grunted. "He'll be glad to see I took a fraud off the street." "Director Holloway and I worked on the task force for institutional integrity in 2018, Vance said. "We have dinner together twice a year. His wife's name is Margaret. They have a golden retriever named Buster." Thorne's hands tightened on the steering wheel. A seed of doubt, cold and sharp, finally pierced his delusion. The details were too specific. A fraud might know the director's name, but the dog. The wife. "You can save your stories for the interrogation room," Thorne said, but his voice lacked the earlier conviction. He drove faster. They arrived at the field office at 12:05 p.m. It was a nondescript brick building surrounded by high fences. Thorne swiped his badge at the gate and pulled into the secure sally port. The garage door rolled down behind them, sealing them in. He got out and opened the back door. "Out!" Vance stepped out, her legs stiff. She stood tall despite the disheveled state of her suit. Thorne grabbed her arm again, leading her toward the intake processing door. He was hoping to hand her off to a booking officer, quickly write his report, and go home. He wanted to be done with this. But as they walked through the double doors into the main hallway of the processing center, fate intervened. It was a Sunday, usually quiet, but there was a multi-agency briefing happening in the conference room. The door to the conference room opened just as Thorne was marching Vance down the hall. Stepping out into the hallway was Deputy Director Holloway holding a cup of coffee and talking to a U.S. Marshal. Holloway looked up. He saw Agent Thorne. Then he saw the woman in handcuffs. Holloway stopped mid-sentence. His coffee cup tilted, spilling brown liquid onto the linoleum. "Elena," Holloway said, his voice a mixture of confusion and horror. The hallway went dead silent, the kind of silence that happens right after a gunshot. Agent Thorne stopped, his hand still gripping Dr. Vance's arm. He looked at his boss. He looked at the prisoner. "Director," Thorne started, his voice cracking slightly. "I have a suspect here, impersonating a federal officer, stolen vehicle. She resisted." Holloway didn't even look at Thorne. He was staring at Dr. Vance, his face draining of color. He walked forward, closing the distance in 3 long strides. "Elena," Holloway repeated, his eyes scanning the handcuffs, the torn sleeve of her jacket, the bruising on her wrists. "My God, what is happening?" "Hello, Robert," Dr. Vance said, her voice cool and detached. "Your agent here seems to be under the impression that I am a car thief with a forged DOJ commission. He arrested me at St. Jude's, in front of the congregation." Holloway turned to Thorne. The look on his face was terrifying. It wasn't anger. It was the cold, calculating look of a man watching a train wreck and calculating the casualties. "Thorne," Holloway said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you know who this is?" "She claims to be DOJ, sir," Thorne stammered. "But her ID looked fake. She was loitering near a Mercedes. The profile fit." "The profile?" Holloway's voice rose to a shout. "This is Dr. Elena Vance. She is the senior advisor to the Assistant Attorney General. She wrote the damn manual on civil rights enforcement that you are supposed to have read." Thorne felt the floor drop out from under him. The world spun. The dog. The wife. It was all real. He had arrested one of the highest-ranking civil rights officials in the country. "Sir, she didn't—" "Uncuff her," Holloway commanded. "Now." Thorne fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the key into the slot. He dropped the keys on the floor. Clatter. Holloway shoved Thorne aside violently. "Get away from her!" The director picked up the keys himself. He moved behind Dr. Vance. "Elena, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." He unlocked the cuffs. They clicked open. Dr. Vance brought her hands forward. Her wrists were encircled with deep, angry red welts. The skin was broken in 2 places. She rubbed her wrists slowly, looking at Thorne. "Agent Thorne," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You refused to verify my credentials. You refused to listen to witnesses. You used force on a compliant subject. And you did it all because you saw a black woman and a nice car and decided that was a crime." Thorne was backed against the wall. He looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his future evaporate. "I was just doing my job," he whispered, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "No," Holloway said, turning on him. "You were doing the exact opposite of your job. You just arrested a federal advisor on a hunch. You profiled her. Give me your weapon." The stripping of an officer's authority is a visceral thing. It is a dismantling of identity. Holloway held out his hand. "Gun, badge, ID now." Thorne unholstered his weapon slowly. He handed it over handle first. Holloway passed it to the U.S. Marshal standing nearby. "Badge!" Holloway barked. Thorne unclipped the badge from his neck chain. The metal felt heavy. He placed it in Holloway's hand. "Credentials." Thorne reached into his pocket and pulled out his ICE identification. Then he remembered. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out Dr. Vance's DOJ credentials. He held them out. The gold foil of the DOJ seal caught the fluorescent light. It was real. It had always been real. Holloway snatched the DOJ credentials and handed them gently to Dr. Vance. Then he took Thorne's ID. "Derek Thorne, you are placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending an investigation, which I assure you will be swift," Holloway said. "You are to leave this building. You are not to speak to anyone. You are not to identify yourself as a federal agent. Escort him out." 2 other agents appeared. They flanked Thorne. They didn't look at him with sympathy. They looked at him with disgust. He was the guy who messed up so bad he took everyone down with him. As Thorne was marched toward the door, he looked back at Dr. Vance. She was checking her phone already, making the call that would bring the wrath of Washington down on this office. She didn't look back at him. He didn't exist to her anymore. He was just a defendant in a lawsuit. Dr. Vance looked at Holloway. "Robert, I want the logs. I want the dispatch recording. I want his personnel file. And I want a medical examiner to photograph these wrists." "You'll have everything, Elena," Holloway said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We can handle this internally." Vance laughed. It was a sharp, humorless sound. "Internally, Robert, this isn't an internal matter. This is a national news story. This is a civil rights violation of the highest order. If this happened to me with my badge and my position, what has he done to people who have no voice? I'm not just coming for him. I'm coming for the supervisors who let him stay on the street with a bias record." Holloway went pale. He knew she was right. Within 2 hours, the video from the church parking lot hit social media. The hashtag arresting while black was trending #1 globally. The image of Dr. Vance, dignified in her pearls, being manhandled by Agent Thorne was on every news channel. The headline on CNN read, "Top DOJ advisor, arrested by ICE agent for leaving church." The White House press secretary was asked about it during the Sunday briefing. The answer was short, "The president is aware and is outraged." The fallout was total. The investigation Dr. Vance demanded didn't just look at that Sunday. It looked at Thorne's entire 9-year career. It found a pattern that was undeniable. 17 stops of suspicious persons in affluent areas. All 17 were people of color. 0 convictions. 0 actual crimes. Just harassment masked as police work. Thorne was fired 3 weeks later. But he didn't just lose his job. He was charged federally with deprivation of rights under color of law. He pleaded guilty to avoid prison time, accepting a permanent ban from any law enforcement or security employment, and 3 years of probation. At 34, his career was dead. He moved back to his parents' house in Ohio, unemployable, in his field, a pariah. Martha Reynolds, the neighbor who made the call, faced her own reckoning. She wasn't charged with a crime being biased, isn't technically illegal in that context, but the social court was ruthless. Her name was leaked. She was fired from her job at a real estate firm for violating their inclusion values. She sold her townhome and moved away, unable to show her face at St. Jude's again. The lawsuit was swift. The Department of Homeland Security didn't want this to go to trial. The optics were impossible to defend. They settled with Dr. Elena Vance for $6.5 million. But Dr. Vance didn't keep the money. She used it to establish the Vance Initiative for Constitutional Policing, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal defense for citizens wrongly detained by immigration authorities. She turned her trauma into a war chest. 6 months later, Dr. Vance stood at a podium in Georgetown. She was accepting the Champion of Justice Award. Her wrist still ached when it rained nerve damage that would never fully heal. She looked out at the crowd of law students, agents, and activists. "We like to believe that credentials protect us," she said, her voice echoing in the hall. "We think that if we dress right, speak right, and have the right job, we are safe. But I learned on a Sunday morning that to a biased mind, my badge was a fake, my car was stolen, and my existence was a crime. Justice isn't about how high you climb. It's about ensuring the system works for the person standing on the lowest rung. Because if they can come for me, they can certainly come for you." The room was silent. This story is a reminder that prestige is not a shield against prejudice. Derek Thorne destroyed his own life because he couldn't see past the color of a woman's skin. He lost his pension, his reputation, and his purpose because he trusted his bias over the evidence. But the real tragedy isn't what happened to Dr. Vance. She had the power to fight back. The tragedy is thinking about how many people Derek Thorne stopped who didn't have a DOJ badge. How many lives did he ruin before he picked the wrong victim? We have to ask ourselves, why did it take a DOJ advisor to expose this agent? Why weren't the previous complaints enough? If you think officers should carry personal liability insurance for civil rights violations so the taxpayers don't foot the $6.5 million bill, let me know in the comments. And do you think Martha Reynolds should have faced criminal charges for her 911 call? Thank you for watching. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never stop demanding the truth.